On the morning of August 10, 2019, convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was discovered dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan. Then U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr ordered an immediate investigation.
We will get to the bottom of what happened, and there will be accountability.
Several days later, the chief medical examiner of New York City ruled his death a suicide. But major questions remain, including how and even with what he may have killed himself. Our review of the evidence uncovered troubling inconsistencies and points to major problems in the government's handling of the case. More than 6 years later, key details of Jeffrey Epstein's death remain unresolved and unknown. CBS News' 60 Minutes first obtained 90 crime scene photos tied to the U.S. Justice Department's 2023 final report. Those photos, taken by New York's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, raise more questions than they answer. Some of these images are being released here for the first time. Crime scene experts who reviewed them were sharply critical, saying Epstein's cell should have been treated like a crime scene. By all appearances, it wasn't. I'm CBS News correspondent Scott McFarland. Here's what we know. Epstein's body was discovered at 6:30 a.m. when corrections officers arrived at his cell to deliver breakfast. According to the only witness who saw him hanging, a corrections officer named Michael Thomas, Epstein was allegedly found suspended from the top of the bunk in a near-seated position with his legs straight out and his buttocks approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inches off the floor. Internal memos obtained by CBS News describe him as cold and no palpable pulses were felt. In total, we've reviewed 90 photos of the scene and the evidence allegedly found there. Here's what those photos show. The sequence of photos starts with a picture of the stairs leading up to Epstein's tier, Tier L. Underlying data from the photo shows it was taken at 9:34 a.m., 3 hours after his body was discovered, and 4 hours before the arrival of the FBI on scene. Next in the sequence is a picture of the tier. According to the official FBI Handbook of Crime Scene Investigation, investigators should establish a progression of overall, medium, and close-up views of the crime scene. This is the only photo of the tier from that morning, and Epstein's cell, located to the right, is not pictured.
Some really shoddy work here, if you can even call it that. I mean, there's an absence of work here.
Nick Barrero is a former law enforcement officer and digital forensic expert.
You always start with the big picture. For example, the socks on the floor in that hallway right there. If you're documenting that piece of evidence, well, one, you would put a little teepee, a little evidence marker on it, a little yellow number 1 or whatever next to it. And then you would photograph it from as far away as you can. And then you go in and you take one maybe, a couple steps away from the socks, getting it more in context. And then you get right up, as close as reasonable. So it's you see as much detail as possible and you take that shot. That's like evidence photography 101.
You can also see on the back wall one of the prison cameras. It was streaming but not recording due to a hard drive malfunction that had been identified but not fixed, according to the Department of Justice report. Next is a blurry image of the door to Epstein's cell, number 220. Running underneath the door is a cable that provided power to a device meant to help him sleep, a CPAP machine. According to prison records, Epstein had initially been assigned to a cell in a different tier, but he was moved here for easier access to an outlet. Prison computer systems were never updated to note that move, according to investigators. On the door, you can see a piece of paper. Later photos show this up close. It's a printout with Epstein's personal details and a black and white picture. This was how prison employees knew who was in the cell. Above that, in a similar plastic slip, is the ID card for Epstein's former roommate, Reyes. Cells typically hold 2 inmates, and following a suspected suicide attempt, Epstein was mandated to have one. The day before Epstein's death, Reyes had been transferred out of the prison and brought to another facility. Former Bureau of Prisons officials were surprised to see Reyes' card still on the door. They're meant to confirm the identity of inmates as they're transferred and should have stayed with Reyes or the officers processing his transfer. Investigators said Reyes' transfer was key because it left Epstein alone in his cell, giving him the opportunity to hang himself. The Department of Justice determined the failure to assign Epstein a new roommate was potentially a fatal mistake. Next, we see the inside of Epstein's cell. There's a bunk bed, a toilet, and a small table attached to the floor. On the floor is the CPAP machine. There are at least 6 blankets or sheets strewn about, and prison policy should have allowed only 1 blanket and 1 sheet per inmate. On the table is a pen, a violation of prison policy, and an MP3 player and headphones, a bag for a CPAP mask, as well as several other items. Under the bunk bed is an unidentified object that could be a suitcase. Along it is a pipe similar to the one attached to the CPAP machine. Neither of those items are noted or documented in publicly available reports. One hallmark of the scene is that numerous items appear to be moved before all the photos have been taken. Case in point, these socks. Earlier we saw them down the hall, yet now a pair appears in front of his door. Experts say this is reflective of poor crime scene control. Next is a photo of the bunk bed again from a different angle. You can see an orange string hanging. This is one of several orange fabric pieces that appear throughout the room, as well as an additional evidence collected by the medical examiner. None of those are confirmed to be the noose that he hung himself with. In the Department of Justice Inspector General report, that picture is featured alongside the description of how he was found, suggesting investigators believe that was the string he used to hang himself. But if that was the case, and the room wasn't disturbed before the photographer arrived, he would have been sitting on mattresses, not the floor. You can see that there are actually 2 mattresses on the floor, as well as additional blankets. Sleeping on the floor and having 2 mattresses were both violations of policy. You can see additional orange fabric, perhaps clothing or ripped sheets, wedged between the wall and the mattress, but there was no documentation of those items. Next are several photos showing a close-up of a note. On one side of the folded paper, it said, "Davis kept me in a locked shower for 1 hour. Noel sent me burnt food. Giant bugs crawling over my hands. No fun." It's not clear who Davis is. Noel likely refers to Tova Noel, one of the corrections officers on duty. The next photo is the other side of the folded piece of paper. There's some indecipherable writing, and underneath that, the name Reyes, Epstein's roommate, and Reyes's prisoner identification number. Next to that is a name and number. CBS News has determined this is Reyes's uncle, who declined to comment. Epstein's brother confirmed this was his handwriting. According to a Bureau of Prisons investigation, Epstein had been making payments to Reyes's prison commissary account through one of his lawyers. It's common in prison for inmates to pay bribes to individuals outside of prison for protection. Reyes died of cardiac arrest in 2020, soon after being released from prison. Court documents indicate he had been cooperating with authorities in a federal case against a drug ring. There appears to be writing on the other side of the paper, but that wasn't photographed. The next series of photos are additional pictures of the bunk bed, showing the rope in detail and blankets strewn about, and a close-up of a different cloth that appears to be tied in a loop. Next, we jump to an entirely different room, although it's not clear where. We can see a defibrillator and an orange cloth tied to a noose-like shape. Comparing the floor, you can see that this is not Epstein's cell. A defibrillator had been brought out to be used on Epstein in his cell and then again in a medic station at the prison, where employees had transported his body. This cloth did not appear in earlier photos in his room. According to the Department of Justice investigators, when the officer discovered Epstein, he said he immediately ripped the orange sheet or shirt away from the bunk bed. The other officer on the scene told investigators she heard Thomas call out for her to retrieve the cutter, and then she heard Thomas rip something. Going back to the photo of the noose, you can see the end of the noose is hemmed, which suggests it wasn't ripped down and was not the noose that Thomas discovered Epstein hanging from. There is no indication of where the noose was found in the reports. A diagram of this noose was included in the official autopsy. However, the Department of Justice acknowledged in their report the noose depicted is not the ligature Epstein used to kill himself. The next photo appears to be back in Epstein's cell. Now we see a CPAP mask. This was not visible in earlier photos, nor was this card or photo or these boxes. Most of those items are not seen again in the medical examiner's photographs.
This is essentially a useless evidence photograph because it's like, okay, this was there somewhere at some time, but we have no idea how or why it ended up in the position that it's in. You would fail your police academy scenario if you did this. Like, there's no investigation here.
Is this the mattress now on its end and these items were underneath? Not clear. Looking at the metadata, the photo appears to have been taken at 10:54 a.m. If that's accurate, that means the entire crime scene had been disturbed several hours before FBI investigators even arrived. Next, there are some additional details of the room, including a small piece of cloth attached to the window. Following that, we see a series of photos of medication being held by an investigator. One item appears to be the same packaging seen on the floor in the earlier photo. We can also note there are now 2 mattresses stacked on top of the bed, suggesting that the entire room has been reorganized, with no documentation of that process or where things were moved from. Here's how the room was found. Here's how it looks 90 minutes later. Remember, the FBI still has not arrived on scene. It appears the items that have been photographed in detail are now placed on top of the bunk bed. Where they came from is not clear. In a second sequence of photos labeled path evidence, we see evidence bags and evidence. The metadata indicates these were taken 5 days later. The first photo is a bag of evidence that says it contained ligature bedsheet material strip collected from the Metropolitan Correction Center cell number 220. There are also 2 additional bags marked Epstein clothing and Epstein bedding. The ligature previously seen on the ground in a room that was not Epstein's cell is now photographed alongside the bag. Again, you can see the end of the cloth has not been torn or cut. The medical examiner also collected this blanket. You can see that it was ripped along the edge. The final evidence photos are Epstein's clothing that had been returned from the hospital. Included in that are plastic zip tie handcuffs. This photo, taken that morning, shows his hands are cuffed. While it may have made sense to restrain Epstein, given he had not been officially declared dead, the Department of Justice report makes no mention of it. According to prison sources, staff had access to handcuffs, which were the standard tool for inmate transport, not zip ties. Department of Justice investigators interviewed 3 inmates on the tier. 2 of them were in the cell across from Epstein's. But one unusual thing to note from an earlier photo, that cell had its windows papered over. That photograph was time-stamped 9:34 a.m., 3 hours after Epstein's body was discovered, although it's unknown when the paper was put up. In the government's report, those inmates were key witnesses in affirming the corrections officer accounts. One of those inmates in that cell said he observed a male CO, or corrections officer, enter into the cell and begin performing CPR. He said he saw Epstein on the floor and saw the guard emerge holding a rope and a defibrillator. He said he saw bruising on Epstein's face and earphones on his ears. Experts noted that removing a noose while the headphones remained in Epstein's ears would have been a particular challenge. A second inmate in that same cell said he saw the officer enter and shake Epstein, then try to pick him up and fall over, then begin giving chest compressions. That prisoner also said they saw staff put Epstein on a stretcher still wearing headphones. He also says he saw a male corrections officer emerge from Epstein's cell holding a sheet with a loop and a knot. So what did the FBI do? The Inspector General report says the FBI inspected the cell and retrieved what it believed to be relevant to its investigation into the cause of Epstein's death, which included 1 torn sheet, miscellaneous papers, and an MP3 player. The Inspector General report doesn't include documentation of those items or what analysis was done on them. It does say the linens were recycled and the remaining personal articles in the room were collected by the Bureau of Prisons. It's not clear what happened to those items, and lawyers who control Epstein's estate did not respond to inquiries. From the report, it doesn't appear that an official FBI crime scene investigator ever visited the scene, documented any items, or ran fingerprint or DNA tests on anything in the room. Again, the Department of Justice declined to comment.
The FBI literally has all of the best tools. I mean, spared no expense. They have every tool you can imagine. And they used none of it, as far as we can tell.
It's absolutely true that suicides by hanging in prisons do happen. We've reached out to the office of the chief medical examiner, as well as former and current staff involved in the investigation, the doctor who pronounced Epstein dead, all of the guards working that night, the EMTs who transported him, the Bureau of Prisons, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and others. All declined to comment or did not respond.